Why are so many European rental cars suddenly showing up on America's biggest highways? Maybe the real shock is not the traffic, but what those drivers are discovering once they leave the airport behind. What if the America they were warned about feels safer, freer, friendlier, and far more addictive from behind the wheel? These highways are not just moving tourists across the country. They're quietly rewriting what many of them thought America was. Route 66. Some roads get you somewhere. Route 66 makes getting there feel like the whole point. That difference can be surprisingly powerful for European visitors arriving with a rental car, especially after years of seeing America reduced on television to traffic jams, political arguments, giant pickup trucks, and endless concrete. Then the windshield fills with open sky, old neon signs, roadside diners, and a horizon that seems to keep moving backward every time the car moves forward. Suddenly, the America they expected and the America outside the window are having two very different conversations. That contrast begins with scale. In Britain, a drive from London to Manchester is already a proper journey. In Belgium, you can cross a large portion of the country before an American family is finished debating where to stop for lunch. Route 66 belongs to a completely different relationship with distance. The historic route stretches roughly 2,400 miles from Chicago toward Southern California, crossing a huge slice of the country along the way. To many Europeans, that is less like taking a road trip and more like giving a rental car a temporary American citizenship. But distance alone does not explain the fascination. What feels distinctly American is the freedom built around the road. You can leave a major city, stop at a family diner, photograph a giant roadside attraction, wander through a small town and continue toward desert scenery without turning the day into a military operation involving 3 train reservations and a platform change. In countries such as the Netherlands or Switzerland, public transportation can make the timetable the backbone of a trip. America flips that relationship around. On Route 66, the traveler controls the clock. A promising diner sign can steal 40 minutes, a sunset can cancel the evening plan. Nobody has to sprint toward track 7 because the next connection leaves in 4 minutes. That may explain why American road culture becomes so addictive once visitors experience it firsthand. The rental car stops feeling like transportation and starts behaving like a key. Behind one turn might be a classic gas station. Behind another, a town that looks almost suspiciously cinematic. Even the enormous convenience stores can become attractions when someone comes from a place where a roadside stop usually means coffee, a restroom, and perhaps one slightly defeated sandwich. Route 66 also exposes something that gets lost when America is viewed only through headlines. Ordinary America can be wonderfully easy to enjoy. The pleasure is not complicated. Drive, stop, eat, talk, look around, keep going. And somewhere between Chicago and the western horizon, a European rental car can quietly become the most American object in sight. Full tank, open road, absolutely no desire to turn around yet. Interstate 15. Interstate 15 has a peculiar talent. It can make a 3-hour drive feel like somebody keeps changing the movie outside the windshield. That visual whiplash is exactly what gives this highway its addictive pull, because few European road trips compress such dramatic landscape shifts into one continuous drive without crossing a national border. Between Southern California, Las Vegas, the Mojave Desert, and the Red Rock country farther north, the scenery keeps changing before boredom has time to settle in. According to the Federal Highway Administration, Interstate 15 runs for more than 1,400 miles from Southern California to the Canadian border. Yet the section through Nevada and Utah is where the American sense of scale becomes almost theatrical. Compare that with Belgium, a country roughly 174 miles across at its widest point. On I-15, 174 miles can feel like the warm-up. The fascination is not simply that America is bigger, it is how quickly emptiness and spectacle trade places. 1 hour can be all desert, distant ridgelines and exits separated by long stretches of nothing. The next can deliver Las Vegas with enough neon to make Times Square look unusually restrained. Then the road keeps going, and the casinos disappear behind mountains as if somebody switched channels. That contrast explains why rental cars become difficult to give up. Flying skips the transformation completely. A train fixes the route and schedule. Driving lets visitors watch America reveal itself gradually, mile after mile, without editing out the strange middle bits. Europe has magnificent motorways, especially through Spain, France, and the Alps, but I-15 offers a specifically American pleasure, the feeling that the landscape is refusing to stay in one category. By the time the rental car reaches Utah, the highway has already delivered desert, neon, mountains, and open country without asking for a passport once. That is a pretty effective way to make just one more exit sound like an excellent idea. Overseas highway. There is something wonderfully unreasonable about driving toward the horizon and realizing the road has decided to follow you straight across the ocean. On Florida's overseas highway, that is not a travel metaphor. It is basically the afternoon plan. The highway runs roughly 113 miles from mainland Florida through the Keys toward Key West, linking island after island by bridges, including the famous 7-mile bridge. What makes it so addictive is not speed or distance, but the strange American luxury of turning a difficult geography into an easy, casual drive. That contrast becomes clearer when placed beside Europe. Greece has thousands of islands, while Croatia's Adriatic coast is famous for island hopping, yet visiting several islands commonly means ferries, timetables, ports, and carefully timed connections. In the Florida Keys, the windshield does most of the paperwork. You finish lunch on one island, start the engine, and the next patch of land simply appears ahead. That changes the psychology of travel. Instead of treating each destination like an appointment, people begin treating the whole day as flexible. A seafood shack can delay the schedule. A strip of turquoise water can earn an unscheduled stop. Nobody feels as though the trip has gone wrong because the route itself keeps rewarding the delay. Americans may see this as ordinary road infrastructure, but from outside, it reveals something unusually appealing about the country. America often builds access directly into the experience. The bridge is not hiding the distance between islands, it lets you enjoy that distance. That is the clever part. The ocean remains enormous, the islands remain scattered, yet the trip somehow feels effortless enough to make another 50 miles sound completely reasonable. By the time Key West finally appears, the rental car has done something sneaky. It has turned geography that should feel inconvenient into one long sunlit excuse to keep going. Pacific Coast Highway. Pacific Coast Highway has a funny way of destroying a perfectly organized itinerary because every few miles the Pacific Ocean produces another reason to pull over and forget what time it is. That habit of stopping whenever the view wins may be one of the most addictive pieces of American road culture. California's State Route 1 stretches roughly 650 miles along the coast, and its famous Big Sur section turns the highway itself into a public viewing platform. There is no admission gate, reserved time slot, or tour guide holding a flag. Travelers simply drive until a turnout appears, park, step outside, and discover that the roadside view would qualify as the main attraction almost anywhere else. The contrast with Italy's Amalfi Coast is revealing. The celebrated SS-163 runs for roughly 50 kilometers, threading through cliffside towns where narrow lanes, buses, and limited parking can make spontaneous stopping complicated during busy periods. California offers a different kind of coastal pleasure. Long stretches where the journey breathes, viewpoints appear naturally, and changing plans feels almost expected. That freedom creates a peculiar American ritual. A 10-minute photo stop becomes 30 minutes because someone notices sea lions, another cliff, or sunlight breaking across the water. Lunch slides later, the hotel arrival moves back, and nobody seems particularly upset about it. The schedule loses, but the day somehow improves. This is where the highway becomes more than pavement. America has turned access to enormous scenery into something wonderfully democratic. Bring a car, find a legal turnout, and the Pacific is yours for a while. It also explains why rental cars keep lingering on this road. The attraction cannot really be finished. Every bend offers a slightly different version of the coast, like California keeps dealing cards from a deck that somehow contains only good ones. Eventually, the GPS starts sounding less like navigation and more like the one responsible adult in a car full of people who have completely stopped caring about arriving on time. Interstate 70. There's a moment on Interstate 70 when the road stops feeling like something laid across the mountains and starts feeling like America simply persuaded the mountains to cooperate. That is the addictive part here. Not the scenery alone, but the casual way enormous geography has been turned into everyday infrastructure. Through Colorado, I-70 climbs above 11,000 feet at the Eisenhower Johnson Memorial Tunnel, one of the highest vehicular tunnels in the United States. Trucks, families, commuters, and rental cars all pass through terrain that looks dramatic enough to require climbing gear. Yet the practical instruction is basically, stay in your lane and keep going. That can feel almost surreal to visitors from Europe. The Alps have extraordinary engineering too. Switzerland's Gotthard Road Tunnel runs for roughly 5 miles, while France and Italy share the famous Mont Blanc Tunnel beneath one of Europe's great mountain ranges. The difference on I-70 is the wider cultural impression. America has a habit of making intimidating scale feel strangely normal. A mountain pass becomes part of the commute. A canyon becomes part of the interstate. A tunnel above 11,000 feet becomes something you drive through while arguing about where to get lunch. That ordinary quality is exactly what makes the road memorable. The Rockies never stop looking huge, but the infrastructure removes just enough difficulty for people to experience them without turning the day into an expedition. And that says something flattering about the American instinct toward mobility. When the land says, this is going to be difficult, the response has often been, fine, where do we put the road? By the time the highway drops toward western Colorado, the most impressive thing is no longer simply the mountains. It is how normal America has made driving through them feel. Blue Ridge Parkway. Blue Ridge Parkway pulls off something almost rebellious in America. It makes slowing down feel like the whole point of driving. The road stretches about 469 miles through Virginia and North Carolina, yet its maximum speed is generally 45 mph. On paper, that sounds inefficient. Behind the wheel, it becomes strangely addictive. That is because the Parkway turns slowness into a luxury. European travelers know beautiful mountain roads well. Switzerland has immaculate alpine routes, Scotland has dramatic highland drives, and Norway has roads engineered through scenery that barely looks real. But those routes often still carry the practical pressure of getting somewhere. Blue Ridge Parkway feels different because the road itself was designed around looking. Overlooks interrupt progress constantly. Curves arrive exactly when the next ridge begins to open. Autumn can turn the mountains into layered bands of red, orange, and gold, while summer replaces the show with deep green valleys fading into blue haze. The road almost seems to keep whispering, "You were in a hurry?" This is where American driving culture shows a softer side that outsiders rarely hear about. The stereotype says Americans want wider roads, bigger engines, and faster travel. Then this 469-mile ribbon through Appalachia quietly asks everyone to calm down and enjoy the view. And people do. That is the cultural surprise. A country famous for interstate speed also built one of its most beloved roads around deliberate slowness. In parts of Germany, drivers celebrate the Autobahn for efficiency and speed. On the Blue Ridge Parkway, arriving quickly would almost feel like missing the joke. The addictive part is not reaching the next destination. It is realizing that for once, being late means you probably did the drive correctly. US Route 101U. S Route 101 reveals a very American luxury that rarely gets advertised properly: space around the road itself. Not empty space in a bleak sense, but room for forests, ocean, farms, towns, and whole stretches where the landscape does not feel squeezed between buildings. That can be surprisingly addictive for visitors from densely populated parts of Europe. Take the Netherlands, where population density is more than 500 people per square kilometer. Belgium is also densely settled, and even outside major cities, roads often pass quickly from one town into another. Route 101 plays by a different set of physical rules. Along parts of Oregon and Northern California, the road can run through huge natural areas where civilization feels present, but not dominant. The result is a kind of mental decompression. Nobody needs to do anything dramatic for the drive to feel memorable. The road simply gives the eye more distance. Forest opens into coastline. A small town appears, then disappears behind miles of trees. The next view arrives without a billboard explaining why it matters. That freedom from visual clutter is part of the appeal. Americans sometimes underestimate how unusual that feels. In much of Europe, land has been used, divided, cultivated, and settled for centuries. The landscape carries layers of human history almost everywhere. Route 101 often gives the opposite sensation. Nature looks as if it still has seniority. And then come the redwoods, which make the joke almost too easy. Some coast redwoods exceed 300 feet in height, turning an ordinary rental car into something that looks like it was parked beside a cathedral column. That is where the road becomes quietly persuasive. America's size is not just measured in miles. Sometimes it is measured in how small a person can feel without feeling unwelcome. Interstate 90. The strangest thing about a very long American highway may be how rarely it makes travelers feel stranded. Interstate 90 stretches more than 3,000 miles from Seattle to Boston, yet much of its appeal comes from something far less glamorous than mountains or skylines. America has built an entire roadside culture around making enormous distances feel manageable. That becomes obvious at the travel centers. To many Europeans, a highway stop is mostly functional. Germany has Autobahn service areas, France has motorway areas, and Italy has autogrill, all perfectly capable systems. But the American version often behaves like somebody combined a gas station, convenience store, diner, coffee shop, mini market, and emergency supply closet, then gave the whole thing a parking lot large enough to host Thanksgiving. The scale sounds excessive until hour 5. Then it feels brilliant. According to the Federal Highway Administration, the interstate highway system covers roughly 48,000 miles nationwide. A network that large created its own supporting ecosystem, and that ecosystem changes the emotional experience of driving. Travelers know that another fuel pump, restroom, hot meal, or enormous cup of coffee is usually waiting somewhere ahead. That reassurance matters more than it seems. It removes friction from distance. A 400-mile day stops feeling like an expedition requiring military-level planning and becomes something closer to a chain of comfortable little resets. Stop, stretch, refill, grab food, continue. For someone used to planning travel around train departures, that flexibility can become dangerously pleasant. There is no platform to miss and no connection quietly leaving while you are still buying lunch. Interstate 90 therefore sells a very specific American pleasure: confidence in the road ahead. The country may be enormous, but it has spent decades making enormous feel surprisingly livable. And somewhere after the second coffee in the third state line, another 100 miles begins sounding less like a warning and more like a perfectly reasonable suggestion. US Route 89 US. Route 89 has a special kind of magic because it makes national parks feel less like isolated attractions and more like chapters in one enormous American landscape. The road links regions near places such as Grand Teton, Yellowstone, Zion, and the Grand Canyon, creating a sense that nature itself has been laid out as a cross-country collection. That's a very different experience from much of Europe. In Switzerland, France, or Austria, dramatic scenery is often woven tightly around villages, railways, ski towns, and centuries-old settlement. In the American West, the scale between landmarks can feel almost extravagant. According to the National Park Service, Yellowstone alone covers more than 2.2 million acres, while Grand Canyon National Park spans over 1.2 million acres. Those numbers are hard to understand until a road starts physically carrying you through the space around them. That is where the addiction begins. The journey becomes less about checking off famous names and more about realizing how much country exists between them. A visitor may leave one major landscape behind, drive for hours, and still find the scenery refusing to become ordinary. There's also something deeply appealing about the American idea of preserving enormous spaces and then making them reachable by road. The wilderness stays wild, yet ordinary people can still approach it without needing an expedition team or specialized equipment. That balance is surprisingly powerful. It creates a kind of road trip democracy. The experience is not reserved for elite adventurers. It is available to families, retirees, students, and tourists with a rental car and enough gas in the tank. Europe protects beautiful landscapes too, but Route 89 highlights the uniquely American scale of that promise. You do not simply visit a national park. You begin to understand why the country needed so much land to hold all of them. Route 1 US. Route 1 exposes one of America's best tricks. You can drive for hours without crossing an international border and still feel the culture changing around you. The highway runs roughly 2,370 miles from Key West, Florida to Fort Kent, Maine. That single route passes through tropical South Florida, the Mid-Atlantic, New England towns, and the colder edge of the Northeast. The road number stays the same, but the America outside the windshield keeps changing its accent. That is the addictive part here. Europe often teaches travelers to expect major cultural shifts after crossing national borders. A drive from Brussels to Paris means changing countries, languages, and road systems within a few hours. US Route 1 delivers a different kind of variety. Florida palms eventually give way to older East Coast neighborhoods, colonial-era towns, fishing communities, and New England scenery, while the Stars and Stripes never leaves the picture. Even the food starts acting like a regional guidebook. Southern roadside menus gradually surrender territory to cheesesteaks, seafood shacks, and lobster rolls farther north. Nobody needs to announce that the cultural landscape has changed because lunch already did. That subtle transition is what flying erases. Airports turn Miami and Boston into two terminals connected by a boarding pass. Driving reveals the hundreds of smaller communities between them, which is where America becomes less like a collection of famous cities and more like a country with dozens of regional personalities. For European visitors, that can be genuinely charming. The United States suddenly feels less standardized than the television version suggested. US Route 1 does not ask travelers to admire one giant attraction. It quietly proves that America can change character many times without ever changing countries. US Route 191 US. Route 191 does something almost mischievous to the European sense of distance. It makes a full tank of gas feel less like preparation and more like permission. Running for roughly 1,600 miles from Arizona to Montana, the highway crosses some of the least densely populated country in the lower 48. In parts of Wyoming, population density is under 6 people per square mile. That matters because the road does not constantly reassure the driver with cities, suburbs, and services. It leaves room for silence, and silence changes the experience. In the Netherlands, Belgium, or England, even rural drives are often threaded between towns, farms, villages, and visible signs of settlement. On Route 191, long stretches can place more emphasis on sky, rock, and open land than on buildings. The result is not loneliness so much as a strange sense of freedom, because there is suddenly nothing demanding attention every 30 seconds. That is the addictive quality this highway offers. Modern life is full of alerts, signs, deadlines, and directions. Route 191 removes most of them. The road narrows the day's priorities down to simple things: fuel, weather, distance, and whatever happens to appear over the next ridge. It is hard not to appreciate a country that still has room for that. The American West often gets described as empty, but that word misses the point. A concert hall is not empty when the music stops for 2 seconds. The silence is part of the performance. Route 191 works the same way. The spaces between towns make the mountains feel bigger, the next gas station more welcome, and every small roadside stop more memorable than it probably expected to be. By the end of the day, a European rental car may be covered in dust, bugs, and evidence of poor snack decisions. Yet the driver usually wants one thing more than a car wash. Another stretch of road with nothing on it, Interstate 10. Interstate 10 can make a suitcase look badly researched. Start near Southern California with desert heat pressing against the windshield, keep heading east, and eventually humid Gulf air arrives with the confidence of somebody who was never invited, but clearly plans to stay. That climatic range is what makes this highway so addictive. I-10 runs roughly 2,160 miles from Santa Monica, California to Jacksonville, Florida, crossing 8 states along the way. Instead of giving travelers one famous landscape, it demonstrates something more revealing about America. A single road can pass through several completely different climate personalities while remaining inside one country. Europe has climatic variety too, but the distances often involve national borders. Driving from dry southern Spain toward wetter northern France means moving through different countries, languages, and road cultures. On I-10, Arizona Desert, Texas Plains, and the humid Gulf Coast all arrive under the same interstate shield. That produces a wonderfully American packing problem. The jacket buried under the luggage suddenly becomes useful. Sunglasses return 10 minutes later. Air conditioning goes from pleasant to essential, then somebody steps outside at a Gulf Coast stop and discovers humidity has apparently been waiting beside the car with a wet towel. According to NOAA climate normals, Phoenix averages summer highs above 100-degree F, while Gulf Coast cities such as Houston combine high summer temperatures with much greater humidity. That contrast is not decorative. Travelers physically feel the country changing, and that is the deeper attraction. America becomes less like one destination and more like several vacations stitched together by asphalt. A rental car makes those transitions impossible to ignore because there is no airport jump cutting out the middle. By the time I-10 reaches Florida, the weather app has worked harder than some passengers. Interstate 40 has one habit European travelers do not expect to enjoy quite this much. It turns roadside food into part of the journey instead of a necessary interruption. The highway stretches for roughly 2,150 miles from California to North Carolina, crossing 8 states and several major regional food cultures. That matters because American highway travel is deeply tied to what appears at the next exit. Barbecue, green chili, chicken fried steak, diner breakfasts, and regional fast food chains can all become landmarks in their own right. In France, motorway dining often carries the logic of service areas and carefully planned stops. Italy has Autogrill, where travelers know what kind of break to expect. I-40 feels more playful because the food changes with the state line and sometimes with the county. The road starts behaving like a menu that is several thousand miles long. That variety creates a surprisingly strong kind of attachment. People remember where they ate almost as clearly as what they visited. A gas stop becomes the place with that ridiculous biscuit. A lunch detour becomes the story everyone keeps bringing up later. The highway stops being dead time between destinations and starts producing memories of its own. The numbers help explain why that culture is so visible. The US. Interstate highway system carries roughly a quarter of all vehicle miles traveled in the country, according to the Federal Highway Administration, even though interstates make up only a small share of total road mileage. That much traffic creates an enormous audience for roadside businesses, and Americans have turned that audience into a culture. The addictive part of I-40 is not simply eating more food. It is discovering that every exit feels like a tiny regional introduction. By the time the rental car reaches the next state, the map may still show miles. The passengers are already thinking about lunch. Maybe that is the real reason these highways stay crowded with rental cars. America does not simply give travelers places to visit, it gives them room to keep changing their minds. One more exit becomes another town, another meal, another story, and suddenly going home feels strangely premature. If you have ever taken an American road trip, tell us which highway surprised you most. And if you enjoy seeing America through fresh eyes, subscribe to the channel and come along for the next journey.